So in this segment, we're going to be discussing a Brexiteer being really mad about the broken fisher kind of fishing promises that Boris Johnson made. And I'll tell you what, this article did make me laugh. I did have to do a fair bit of reading for this one, so I hope you can hit the like button. But Boris Johnson has been branded a liar over his Brexit promise that the UK would, quote, take back control, end quote, of its waters, with warnings that the UK fishing industry is now, quote, on its last legs, end quote. And that's from June Mummery. The former Prime Minister, who pledged to get Brexit done, had promised to protect the industry before signing a trade deal with the EU, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. The fishing agreement states that there would be a 5-year transition period that would see EU boats continue to gain access to UK waters until 2026. So this article, I think we do also get access to some EU waters as well. So this article cites June Mummery a lot, who is a former MEP and a Brexiteer, most known, I think, for moaning about post-Brexit state of fishing. I think she calls into the James O'Brien show once in a while, and it's quite funny. Funny that we did not hear about this level of complaints before the referendum. I didn't hear about fishermen being on their last legs. At the time, Johnson admitted that some concessions had been made to the EU. I wonder why we made concessions. For Johnson to get the trade and cooperation agreement as we have it now, he had to make them. I can't imagine a situation where the UK would have got a free trade agreement without some sort of agreement for EU fishermen like we have now. We have seen some French fishermen protest over the lack of licenses, the speed in which they were meant to be given to them. Given to them despite the fact that them fishing in the UK waters for decades now, historically, under the EU fishing agreement. Best case scenario, we could have had an FTA without fishing potentially being covered, so there would have been tariffs on fish. But do you think the French wouldn't have protested this? The point is, we did a trade deal with a much larger trading entity. Of course, we're going to have to make concessions. They're the bigger partner. They've got the bigger population. They've got more money. That's generally how trade goes. When you're the bigger partner, you can make big demands. June Mummery, the former MP of the East of England and founder of Renaissance of the East Anglian Water, using French words. French words, how could you? Surely you should be using English words, not Renaissance, a French word. Sad times. I think it's a French word. She's launched a furious attack on Mr. Johnson, claiming UK fishermen have been, quote, stabbed in the back, end quote. And she kind of goes into kind of the classic stab in the back theory of we could have had it all, rolling in the deep, etc. In some ways she's right that the promise was to take back control of our waters, but take back control to do what? We used them as a bargaining chip to get what we needed for the free trade agreement. So, you can spin this as Johnson did what he said he would do during the referendum. But, he did claim, quote, I can assure great fish fanatics in this country we will, as a result of this deal, be able to catch and eat quite a lot of prodigious quantities of extra fish, end quote, Johnson said in December 2024 about the deal. Even Nigel Farage claimed the deal was, quote, far from perfect, end quote, and that for fisheries in particular, it was, quote, a rotten deal, end quote, but added, quote, it's a lot better off than we were 5 years ago, end quote. So a lot better off than we were under the EU's common fishery policy. Now, it's interesting, given the fact that a lot more fishermen have complained post-Brexit, how much better is this fishing deal? I wonder. Now, I guess things must have been pretty dire for us to be in this better position, right? Back, obviously, during the referendum. But the issue is that things are worse now, in my opinion. It's harder for the fishermen to export fish in general due to the red tape. There's a lot of export paperwork. Shellfish is even worse. When it comes to exporting shellfish, if it's not from grade A waters, so if it's from grade B waters, they have to be purified, but they can only be purified within the EU, and once they're purified, the shelf life is effectively gone. They don't last long after that. The EU doesn't allow unpurified shellfish from non-grade A waters, if that makes sense. This idea that the EU will just roll over on fishing because they import our fish, therefore it would be in their best interest to not put tariffs on the fish, has been debunked. Johnson's whole argument was, the EU, they love eating British fish, so they're not gonna do anything to jeopardize that. We saw French fishermen blockade ports. I think certain ports in France telling British fishermen looking to land their fish directly in France rejected. They told them to get lost. That impacted Guernsey a lot. The situation we are in now is far worse, but I'll explain that at the end of the video. In terms of fishing, June Mummery told The Express during an explosive interview, saying, quote, what UK fishing industry? We've completely lost it. The industry's practically gone on its last legs. Back in the day, Iceland took control of their lucrative waters, kicked us out, and wouldn't let us fish in their waters anymore. Within a fortnight, we were buying fish from them because there were thousands of jobs on the Humber that needed the raw material. Boris Johnson said we would take back control of waters. That was a bloody lie. A UK fisherman had been betrayed and stabbed in the back. End quote. And so I looked a bit at the Cod Wars. It's been a while since anyone's really spoken about them, and I think she's missing a lot of context here. So this was, the Cod Wars was during the height of the Cold War, and Iceland was threatening to leave NATO, expel US forces from Iceland. This sort of conflict would have seen two NATO members essentially fight each other, which is not a good look. Essentially the UK kind of navy versus the Icelandic navy and the Icelandic fishermen. One of the NATO tenets is that an attack on one is an attack on all of them, so it would have been interesting to see how that would have played out. In the end, NATO helped to mediate the agreement, and from what I read, the UK had to stand down. And I think ultimately we were in the wrong because we were entering into the it's called the EEZ. It's the economic exclusive zone that every country possesses unless they choose to trade it away, and we were entering essentially Norway's kind of exclusive zone. Based on what I've read about the Cod Wars, it looks like Iceland had the legal right to expand their territorial waters, so the UK were in the wrong because we were entering Icelandic territorial waters. We kept buying the fish in the end because we had no choice, because the jobs, and these are the fish people like to eat, cod, haddock, normally found in the Icelandic waters. Plus, we could have put tariffs on the Icelandic fish if we wanted to, and started a trade war over this with Iceland. But I believe, as this was before the EEA agreement, so I don't think Iceland would have been covered under the current agreements they're covered now. But we chose not to. British people mostly eat fish like cod, which are found in the colder areas, whereas for EU consumers, they have, I think, a wider palate, not to diss anyone in Britain, for fish, so they would be more open to buying other kinds of fish. They do buy a much wider array, I think, and they consume different kinds. And because the EU is so big, they could find alternative countries to source the fish from. I think it's Croatia that have started selling more shellfish into the EU as a result of the UK not being a viable option anymore. So the EU's ability to find alternatives is quite high. So yeah, Mumry's explanation here is, I think, lacking a lot of context. The idea that we kind of bully the EU in terms of trade for fish, I just don't think it would have worked, and especially given fishing is such a small part of the UK's economy, whereas I think Iceland it might be a lot bigger. Miss Mumry's accusing of Mr Johnson, despite his insistence to protect the industry, of, quote, giving the EU our fishing waters, end quote, is something he can never deny. The former MEP is also furious. There are what she claims around 17,000 European fishing vessels in British waters, with many even coming as far as the 6-mile exclusion zone. With the EU fishing vessels, some UK-based fishing companies are owned by foreign companies, so I'm not sure if they'd be classed as EU fishing vessels. Also, some UK fishermen sell their licence to EU fishermen. She didn't mention that, but the issue is that this is a red herring. The most consumed kinds of fish in the UK are not really within the UK's kind of nautical area. Cod and haddock are more around Norway, which the UK failed to get a deal with early on because we decided to move the goalposts on them, and the Nords were like, nah. So you had a super trawler stuck in Hull because the UK decided to mess around. Didn't see her too angry about that situation, I don't think. That was really bad for the UK fishermen. But, when it comes to the exclusion zone, if they're not coming within the 6-mile exclusion zone, then there's no problem. There's not an issue. They're not breaking the law unless they come into the 6-mile exclusion zone. But that's where you're meant to have, boats and things to monitor that. And that's where you can kind of, discuss that with the EU and say, look, you need to control your mans here. She continued saying, quote, at the 11th hour, Boris gave the EU our fishing waters. He cannot deny that or get out of that. We are supposed to be taking back control of 200 nautical miles of water. Foreign boats are only supposed to come up to the 12-mile exclusion zone of British coasts, but they're coming all the way up to the 6-mile exclusion zones. You still have 1,700 vessels in our waters, and 8 of those are super trawlers, end quote. And, if they were breaking the rules, then I'm sure you would have pointed that out. But if they're within their rights to come up to the 6-mile exclusion zone but stay on the other side of it, I don't see an issue. And I'm sure if the EU fishermen were breaking the rules here, I'm sure we'd see it more and more in the Daily Mail, the Express, and all of these other kind of papers. I'm sure June Mummery would be everywhere kind of talking about it. Miss Mummery concluded, quote, UK fishermen are skint and on the bones of their backsides. We've had the COVID pandemic and the hospitality sector shut down. Who on earth would invest in fishing in this country, end quote. And, damn, are things really that bad? Because I don't think the EU counterparts are the same, I don't think EU fishermen are in this kind of predicament. She says, quote, Boris gave Emmanuel Macron 70 more fishing licences last year free of charge. A fishing licence for a young lad leaving school is around £100,000. You have fishing towns like Grimsby, Hull, Lowesoft, Great Yarmouth and Hartlepool, but Boris has literally stolen all of their opportunities and aspirations. He lied to us all. End quote. And then she concluded, quote, the UK government has betrayed the coastal towns, villages, communities. You stabbed fishermen in the back. What the hell are you going to do about it? The industry is just about finished, end quote. And the question is, are they going to keep voting Tory? Because if they do, then they're just rewarding the Tories. When it comes to licences, I don't... These are, what we promised France. These are part of the TCA. So, to argue we gave these away free of charge is like it was part of the deal. It's part of the deal. If you have an agreement for whatever, it doesn't make sense what she's saying here. I don't want to attack her because for maybe not knowing things, because she should have a lot more expertise in the fishing industry. But they were given as part of the trade deal we have with the EU, not just because Boris Johnson was like, do you know what, take these licenses, go on, Macron, mate. Shortly after the trade deal with the EU was signed, then Prime Minister Mr Johnson admitted concessions were made to Brussels, but insisted for the first time since 1973 the UK would have, quote, full control, end quote, of its waters. Fishermen suspect Johnson traded fish for other issues, while fishing alone contributed to just 0.03% of the British economy, or 0.1% of UK GDP if processing is included. For the fishing communities of Britain, it's a lifeline and a way of life that goes back thousands of years. And in the end, the UK, the fishing industry is not worth a lot to the UK's GDP, and that's why Johnson made the decision he made. It's that simple. The fishermen got played, used in the referendum, used in the 2019 election. It's up to them to hold people accountable. But if they choose to vote for the Tories again, then in the words of DJ Khaled, quote, congratulations, you played yourself, end quote. And I haven't got much more to say, apart from let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.